Good morning and welcome to Rise and Shine Sundays. My name is Jamie Rich, and I have to tell you something. I couldn't be happier in this moment. Each Sunday when we come to you, we do a live, unscripted presentation around a particular topic. And this week, our topic deals with change. And sometimes even when you dare to embrace the whole concept of change, all sorts of other things change. It had been our plan to move you into our new studio in a platform that we'll be using moving forward. But you know what? That script changed. In fact, that script changed less than 60 seconds ago. So, one of the things that I think is really important as we're talking about a subject like change is we really need to change the definition of change. And so, if you're joining us this week on Rise and Shine Sundays, we're glad you're here. And our topic this week is, what if your definition of change changed? I think so often we have been told that change is hard, change is difficult. We really want to define change as something based on our past experiences or things that we're afraid of in the future moving forward. So, one of the things that I want you to consider today is, what if the definition of change changed? Not trying to tell you that your current definition is inadequate, unreliable, in need of change, but the idea would be to create an atmosphere where that definition of change could change. So, with me in the round table to discuss the possibilities of change, um, are the people who joined me in another room about 2 minutes ago and are now back here in the studio to begin the broadcast. Good morning to you both.
Good
Good
morning.
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 So, what changed? No, what's changed from the last time we were here before? So, saying you're always really good at making sure that we start off on the right foot with understanding what the definitions and parameters are of things. Would you be so kind as to help us with a sort of an overview of change from
Yeah,
your
I
perspective?
think, I think the best way, the biggest resonance that people will have is if we think go back to COVID, right? COVID was such a drastic, very quick, like we all have to do this. There was that fear of no toilet paper, right? There was fear of all the bleach running out. There was, are we going to have enough food? Are we going to have a job? But things were just happening so fast, right? And if you think about when change happens in your own life, when you're in control of it, you get to decide the pace, right? But when this huge external factor, and we all handled it together, right? And I think now when we're in, like, now here we are, what, 6 years later, and we're still dealing with the impact of all that change so quickly that our nervous system is still trying to adjust to what. And then if you think, and then add that, right, plus everything that's going on in the world, all the things that are going on. I heard yesterday, I know here in Kansas City there was some protests down at the plaza, so like, there's that, people are, just in a place of vulnerability, and the emotions of all that change back in 2025, we didn't quite know how to process. And so now here we are in this space, still trying to navigate change now in the workplace. I know I've been having a lot of conversations about psychological safety in the workplace.
Mhm.
Psychological safety, like, and just conversations. I know as I've been talking and teaching people, I've been talking about how to have those non-threatening conversations during change, right? Because we're all learning now how to kind of re-communicate with each other
Mhm.
in a softer, pleasant way where we can still move forward and grow.
Mhm.
So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that's foundational. That's really foundational. What does it bring up for you, Ray?
Wonderful intro and start is just want to add a bit of context to that because I'm sure Sang is going to jump in, and you too, Jamie, real quick, because change is not what we think it is to start off with. A few years back, I did research because I was working with several groups on what is change. So if you're wondering, there's more than a dozen, probably even more, theories of change.
Mhm.
And they essentially are pretty much flawed. Change is not linear, and that was the initial starting point. Then I looked into, well, how do you go about change? Well, guess what? Somebody wrote a book. This was a group of experts. And if you had to guess how many change methods there are, what would you say?
More than 10.
More than 10? More than 10 and less than a million? You'd be right.
Yeah.
This book is 600 pages, contains over 150 change methods.
Wow.
And the authors, I'll get to the point. The authors were, you'd think, well, what do they have in common? The last chapter of the book, and the people who wrote the book will probably be ears are burning, is they weren't able to determine what did these elements have in common. So they were all viewing it from different perspectives and could not come into agreement to what changes. So that's the wonderful thing is that change is not what we think it is. What we have allowed, and what you started saying was a perfect example of, well, how did we experience change? And how did we adapt to change through COVID? And the answer is a whole bunch of different ways, and it wasn't the same for everybody.
Right. And we didn't have the tools and resources to cope with all those different ways. And now it's like we're having, here again, 6 years later, we're still quote unquote kind of backpedaling, trying to like, okay, let's back it up a little bit. Let's pause and go back to slowing down when we had to rush back in again, because then everything opened up and then it was like, oh, you're free. And it was like, now you can go. And then the demands of employment, the government, just all the different things have caused that external things, not to mention, we haven't even talked about what's happening at home.
Right.
Like if, with the cost of, just cost in general, whether it's your relationship with your spouse, your children, whatever that home life looks like too, because that's another part of, how relationships shifted and changed during that time too. So.
Well, let's break this down a minute. And if you're just now joining us, our discussion topic this morning is, what if your definition of change changed? And we are kind of taking on some of the bigger changes that we've talked about. Sang was talking about the impact that all of us felt during the COVID epidemic and the shutdowns that happened. Ray was also telling us that there's a book that defines change 600 different ways and finds no common theme to it. I think what that reminds us, though, is that in and of itself, the fact that there are all these different ways that change can be expressed, change can be defined, means there's a lot of room in your life to be able to change your definition of change in a way that serves you. Because if we begin from the premise of change is bad, change is wrong, changes there, all of these kind of beliefs that you've kind of picked up about change. If I say, change is really easy. Well, if I say that, does that mean that the things that I'm changing didn't mean anything? And I think what I'm inviting you to consider is, let's really look at that definition of change. And I'm going to begin it way down. Sang began us with the idea of COVID, because it's a way in which we can really see the clear impacts of how that change, just really shifted everything in the world. But I also want to start on the bottom and bring it up, which is the very famous Chinese, or is it? No, it's Japanese. I think they trace it back to Confucius, which is the line of, pluck a blade of grass, change the universe. And there are these simple changes that we make that do have, to use a term we talk about here, those ripples that go beyond and beyond. And I think that even if you're able to begin by saying, oh, wait, change isn't difficult, right? It is your definition of change that maybe is something that could change to make it easier for you to change. Did you follow that saying? Is that sort of a, did you feel, I'm sure like in the time of COVID, there were certain things that you couldn't help but change because you had to, right?
Yeah. And here's how I experienced COVID, right? So I experienced COVID a tad bit differently than everyone else, right? Because one, I had already been doing Zoom calls for probably 10 years prior, right? That was already a thing. I was already in a place of calmness at that point where my life was going very slow. If I, it wasn't the rush, the pace. It was like if you went to, when you go, if you ever gone to the islands and you go and they're just, you have breakfast for an hour and a half, they just go at a slower pace. So my life was already kind of like that at the time. So when chaos ensued amongst everyone, I was like, oh, what's the best way to support the chaos? Because, there were lots of things that people were now having to learn. People had to learn how to do Zoom. People had to learn how to do this. And, that's when, there were all this information. And so I experienced COVID a little bit differently. And so being able to have that and watch how the world changed, watch how my families did handle things different depending on where they were in the country, right? So even in that, it's like the change of just one thing, right? One thing could be different, and there's just a huge shift there.
Right.
So,
But you laid the first plank down, which was change is always an opportunity to learn.
yes. And I think looking at it and going, when you were talking about it earlier, the definition, it's like when you talk about a tree is a tree doesn't question whether or not a tree is a tree, right? Change is change. There's always going to be change. It's always going to be change no matter what. So you can't change what's going to be changed. Right?
But hang with it, and Ray, I know you want to jump in here too, but I really want to make sure that we get across real early is if you look at change as an opportunity to learn something that is, whether it is a change that you initiated on your own, whether or not it's a change that is imposed upon you, whether or not it is a change that has just appeared in your field, it is an opportunity to learn, and the depth to which that learning and adjustment you have to go through is part of the adjustment to change, right? So as you know, I don't think you've ever met a lot of people my age, but as you know, a lot of people my age don't like to change. Because one of the things that you also begin, building on something that you said, Ray, there are 600 definitions of change, right? But it's the baggage that comes with change. It's the second definition of change, right? Well, I know that change is on the horizon. It's an opportunity to learn. I don't want to learn anything new. Change is upon us. It means I have to adjust. I don't want to, there's always this, ancillary component to change that colors it in some way. Is that true for you, Ray?
You touched on so many different things. Is that as you guys are sharing, there's an interesting thing that's coming into my mind. Is there's the paradox that change exists at every second of our lives,
Sure.
but we've been taught or indoctrinated to view change as a negative, because change within the context of the bigger system is viewed as a negative because it is an attack or a shift of what's so-called the norm, or the status quo. So when COVID came along, what's interesting is everybody was scrambling to get back to the norm, and what it opened up back. I'm looping back to learning. So there's the belief that, well, any change is really you should be resisted, but no, every second is change. So, and we as human beings, as we get older, we're actually going through change, and why are we doing it? It's just that we're resisting certain elements that we don't really want to face. And with COVID, which was fascinating, was as Sang mentioned, when you slowed down and you got that pause, you got to look at what was happening in your life and around you. People said, you know what, staying at home and not having to go to work for 8 hours, hey, that ain't such a bad thing after all. So hence the concept of hybrid working, doing work at home and stuff. So that was a new learning moment where people said, well, I'm not really happy at work.
But you
I
hit
want
up
to
on
change.
but you hit on the second thing, building off what Sang was saying, which is learning, and then there's adaptation, right?
Yes.
And as you know, we can freely refuse to adapt. And I think that so it's change, learning, right? Then there's the adaptation, and the adaptation is a really sort of interesting area to the change. You were saying that some people want to go back. Let's get back to where we were. The only way something's changed, we got to figure out how to get back there. Something's changed. Wait, new opportunity to learn. Don't want to adapt. Going to stay here. I'm gonna squat. I'm a squatter now in my own change. Or there's the embrace, right? Which is, and those aspects of change, depending upon how you've been conditioned, saying one of the things that was so beautiful about what you said earlier on is that, you have this wonderful ability to sort of roll with things, but roll through things with an awareness of who you are. And that gives you, do you want to speak to that? Are you aware of that for yourself?
It is and it's interesting because when it's described to me that way, it feels that way, but it doesn't. And I'm trying to figure out how to explain that. It's like I have this I have a type A personality where it's like I have to have the checklist. I have to have it's like this and this and this and this, and I'm like, let's go. But then I'm also, if it doesn't feel right, I don't do it. And it's kind of like also how I've taught my children. If what you're doing is not fun, don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Whereas we were taught, do it anyway. If you don't like it, do it anyway. Right. And so people have talked about that before. It's like one of those things that I can, people see that through me, right? But I don't necessarily, I do know that I kind of feel through some things there. Then I will sit down though with myself and go, okay, what are these concrete? It's like, I feel like when you're doing if people are doing a budget, their expenses, you're going to put down your fixed expenses first, and then you have all the variables to kind of flow around, right?
Right.
Because things, you may think you're going into a meeting and you get X, Y, and Z, but you might get some vibes in the meeting that just don't sit well with you.
Right.
And so, and then again, that's the part. And so I think over time, I definitely got there.
Yeah. Well, let me show you a comment in the chat, because it is a common, Jessica is saying something, change simply is. The uncertainty, the uncomfortable nature of that comes from how we and others handle it, right? And again, there's this term I like to use, which is that sort of somatic cognition in change, right? We had talked a little bit a couple of weeks ago about the idea of transitions, and a lot of people find themselves in transition, right? But if you say that sentence a different way, finding yourself in transition. And so when change is happening, just like that uncertainty, that uncomfortable feeling that comes along with change, is from how we and others handle it, right? Because sometimes the change impacts others, right? But it's that adaptation phase. And to me, that adaptation phase can only be really, truly understood somatically. You know what I mean? I don't know if this is true for anybody who's watching, or either the two of you, but sometimes you can be really good in situations in which change is happening, because you have that underpinning knowledge of yourself. You don't necessarily know what the change is all about, right? But you know how to find yourself in that adaptive routine, and that you don't view the adaptation that you're going through as somehow something you did wrong, something that, you know what I mean? So you're nodding, please share more as we talk a little bit about this. Saying, go.
Well, I think if we talk about adaptation, the thing that came up was, again, I know COVID is probably the biggest thing that I can talk about, that it's, again, all encompassing, right? Where we all
Sure.
experienced it. So if we think about the uncomfortability of the mask, right? When we were told, well, you have to wear a mask, right? And then it became, people were like, I'm not wearing a mask, right? So, going back to exactly what Jessica's talking about, which is, how did people handle certain things? How did the quickness of, you know, people not being able to go to work, who's an essential worker? Then it became who's important, who's not, right? Then it became one of those type of situations. So then I feel like during COVID and the change, there was huge emotions that came up. And a lot of times when we are in change, if you think about, like, when we have a baby or something like that, it's a gradual change. We're learning and things like that. But then you're like, now I got to function on 1 hour of sleep instead of 12, like when you go to when we're doing this show, right? Like every week there goes, like, we could have, one day we could have 5 people, one day we could have 3 people. Like, we just never know in terms of, like, what's going on. And it is, how do we handle ourselves? And again, going back to, how do I want to show up in whatever is being presented to me and change? And what am I in control of? And whatever externally is changing, I get to decide how I get to experience whatever change is happening outside of me.
Right. Ray, was there something that built on that
Yeah,
too?
that was a wonderful summary. That makes so much sense. Is there again? I was thinking back to the research I did with the change, and it's back to, we're taught that change is linear, so you can control it, right? It's
Right.
sequences. But change, so in their discovery, that's the one big thing they did, is they referred to it as the messy middle. And it's what Sang is describing, is that we don't really know what's going on, but it's how you are at the moment in the space, in this area of discomfort and uncertainty. And they drew it as like a child's drawing. It was all messed up. So that's the uncertainty of being in that space. So that's part of the discomfort of change, is we think it's one thing when it really is something else. But what Sang has been sharing with us, which is really important, is once you sort of let go of the so-called, not well understood linearity of change, to something that's how I am in a space and how I respond to that and how I learn and unlearn, essentially. So I think that the messy middle is really why we find it difficult, because we haven't accepted that we've lost control to some extent.
Well, and I'm going to also add that we don't have that control, but we also forget that we have a choice.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Which is, it could be, I'm going to leave this company because I don't like the big change that's happening. Whatever that is. Again, things are changing here, and then how. So yeah, totally get that. And I also understand old people there, Jamie, who don't like to adapt, because when you were talking about that, I thought about, AI and ChatGPT, and how the older generation, they're being forced to learn this, right? Like my daughter was talking about something where in one of the parking garages, now you have to download this app. And she said, what did she called it, something very specific. But basically they were discriminating against the elderly, so to speak, right? Because they don't all have smartphones. They don't all have the capabilities to scan these QR codes, and even in that, it's hard, it's challenging, because they've known the world for such a long time, and technology moves so fast, right? And so the patience with the elderly, and I don't mean it like that, but like with the older generations having to adapt to AI and ChatGPT and just the technology aspect of it, has a lot of them uncomfortable, to be honest. But
and again, one of the things we have not talked about, and this is that adaptation and evaluation part. That is the other part of change that we're not talking about. There is an adaptation that, first, all of the different steps that we've sort of identified. But once we get to adaptation, there is this opportunity for, not all change is good, right?
Right.
And there is this opportunity, again, just like you said, to choose, right?
Mhm.
And again, that's why these definitions, all we're trying to do, I guess, in this discussion, is to allow you to have an opportunity to look at change in a way that doesn't bring you instant discomfort.
Mhm.
Now, if things are changing and you don't like them, you have agency to be able to, again, choose to do what you need to do, right? So this is sort of, again, I feel like if we talk a little bit too much and we keep saying COVID, COVID, COVID over again, this when it comes up on YouTube, maybe just get banned for that
Right.
reason. But it was an interesting scenario that you presented to us because everybody had a reaction to it.
Yeah.
Everybody experienced a change, right?
Right.
And that we also had to then make all the micro changes that we need to.
Mhm. Mhm.
Some
Mhm.
people were able to work from home. Some people were able to do all of these things, right? So, but not all of those things are good, right?
Mhm.
And so the lessons of change, right, is change is right. We've talked about that. We've
Mhm.
recognized that there is this these definitions that we're going to come up against, right? That we've had, and it's whether or not we want to adapt those definitions, right?
Mhm.
Be able to learn to see if there is anything. But if the evaluation has been determined, right? Um, that allows you to change again, right? And what I find so challenging for most people who are having difficulty with change is their refusal to um, evaluate and move on.
Mhm.
Like they cannot let go of what didn't go well. I have a friend who still is upset that Houlihan's took out his favorite dessert item, and for years he would go in and just order it, just to make everybody annoyed. And you know, he did it kind of as a joke, but I was just kind of going, it's really hard. The evaluation is no, I'm still gonna nail this thing. I'm gonna carry this cross. You know what I mean? And I
Mhm.
think again, this is where, after a period of time, your life can end up being just resistance to changes that were
Yeah.
opportunities for you to learn and adapt. Ray, does that spark
Yeah,
something for
yeah.
you?
It's an aspect I think we've touched on previous discussions. Is letting go
Hmm.
is like maybe it's not a choice. You're being forced to let go, but it's essentially understanding what's going on and to not not put your energy in the wrong place, as you've described in resistance, is to understand, okay, the environment, the conditions have changed. uh, what choice, where will I go? Will I spend
Right,
it in a negative space, or will I grow in another area?
right. Jessica, and reminds us that it is the willingness is the key. I realized myself yesterday I was unwilling to let something go. I had to decide. I think there's a really important thing. I had this conversation with a friend of mine on Thursday, and they were talking about how, letting go. Well, you just need to let go. And I wanted to say, you realize, of course, that many people's definition of letting go is giving up.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
And the willingness is the key in that as well, right? Which
Mhm.
is, all right, letting go doesn't mean giving up.
Right.
Letting go means da 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 changing.
Right.
Yeah, saying you've been sitting on some things for a while. What's cooking?
Well, no, I love, well, and Jessica's right. And I think, you get to decide. It's again, goes back to a choice. I get to decide if I'm willing or unwilling, right? I get that power. And I think somewhere we lost that ownership of power of choice. And and I think we've been, I want to say probably pre-COVID, right? Where we were so focused on the external of our lives that it opened up the internal world, and now we're having to also cope with that and technology change and all, just so much change happening with everything, and it's but it's, I get to decide how I show up. I get to do that. And I think just reminding ourselves the power of our own choices, and but also that we get to decide how the willingness, like, just go, it simply is. It simply is your choice. So
Well, and again, the twins, if you will, of choice and change, right? We would like to think that every change is a choice, but that's not true at the outset. But again, going back to the thing that Jessica reminded us at the top of the hour, it's how we handle it. So within that is, if it's a choice, excuse me, if it's a change that happened without choice, there is still a choice in how you change.
I feel like we need a poem at this point. Like, we need Dr. Seuss to break it down and put it in a poem. Did Dr. Seuss write a book about choices?
Well, and I think that if change exists, change is all around us, right? It is the only constant, right? But again, we're talking today, if you're just now joining us, we're talking about, what if your definition of change changed? And, so that brings up an awful lot of levels of how change impacts us, right? And we're in our few minutes that we've been talking about this morning, we can simplify it down. That doesn't mean that change can't also be hard. And what we're inviting you to consider is, it's not a predetermined evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
You may think that change is hard, but this change was relatively easy.
Mm-hmm.
You may think that, well, change is, means I'm going to have to get up. Well, no, that change didn't happen. So it's still being open to your own exploration of this change, your own adaptation, and your own evaluation of what that is, right? Right. Something
Yeah.
pop?
Yeah, one of the things that I've experienced, and it has always been a thing in my life, is that you build up this apprehension to something you have to learn or something that you change, and you're fearful. You're going, "Oh, that's so hard. That's whatever." And then once I got into it, I'm going, "This isn't so bad." So the interesting aspect was that it's not always how you think it is. It's what you experience or what you learn from the shift that you're about to make. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been thinking of this question as we've been going through this is, let's see, how do I want to put this? How is change, when you're the one that's making a change that's going to impact others, right? How would you two handle that aspect when you're about to make a change that's going to ultimately impact others? How is that for you?
Well, I'll toss this back, grasshopper, and say, if we are in relationship with anyone and we do change, there's always that constant flow. I walk with a guy in the gym, and sometimes a different guy shows up every day because he changes a lot. No, I mean, that makes it's just, some people do. Sometimes when you encounter a good friend, it's just like, what's going on with you today, right? But what I think you're talking about is, what do you do when you make a change for yourself, right? That then has impact on other people, and quote, they have to change.
Yes. Or you're in relationship and you're making a change, right? Or you're I know, as a single mom of kids, like, of asking, it's going to impact them. So I always included my children in some things that I knew would impact them. Right. So it's like, when you're the one that's executing a change that is going to impact others, right? how does that come up? That's also a change that is hard to navigate.
It is. It is. I have some thoughts about that. Ray, do you?
Yeah, just jump in. I was just going to say I'm kind of a relational thinker, so when I'm about to make a change, I always include, as Sang has just mentioned, is okay. What effect is that going to have on others? And others that I know in family, especially, are bomb droppers. They say, "This is what I'm going to do," and then I'll go, "Whoa." Gee, it would have been nice if you eased me into it,
Right.
or at least gave me some context, but you're basically bomb dropping. So I'm more relational.
Yeah.
Jamie?
Yeah.
Matt?
Hang on a second. I was just something changed all of a sudden. I had to respond to it.
I like that segue.
This is a nice thing about being live, but I think for me, one of the strongest imprints that we have is when we recognize our relationship to other people and want to be conscious about the changes we make for ourselves and are aware that as we do that, we are changing things for other people. And so my rejoinder back to you saying is, I think we bring the same sensitivity to ourselves as we do to others.
Mm-hmm.
And you can say that the other way around. We bring the same sensitivity to others that we bring to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going through an abrupt change and it's just like, nope, I'm cutting my losses here. This is all changing. That prevailing attitude is going to be what's communicated to people that you are in contact with.
Right.
One of the things I used to say a lot in my work in doing events, when I would say people take their cues from the host.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. If a speaker is up there and something happens in the moment and they are completely panicked, the audience will panic along with them, right? Yes. And if they just say, well, you know what, that AV thing didn't work, did it? I once had an audience full of people getting ready to watch a short film that was supposed to be, and this was back in the days when we actually used CDs sometimes in the big project. So there's a room full of nearly 300 people, and I have to walk up in front of the audience and open up the empty CD box and say, we have no idea how this happened. Right. I learned early on that the best way to handle change is to be true to what I believe about the change myself. And so I use that as a guiding principle. I will, according to other people, overshare sometimes, but that's because I want sometimes people to know like I could have told the audience, oh, well, it broke and something happened. But you know what? I thought this was rather funny. And, we're going to fix this. I hate to use the word fix, Ray, but there it is. But things happen. People need to see this. And so, again, that goes back to developing the somatic awareness within yourself to handle change, right? Sometimes we hear things in our head when we talk about change. And right now,
Michael Jackson, oh yeah.
We're going to make that change for once in my life.
Yeah.
Going to feel real good, going to make a difference, right? Mm-hmm. So as we become more comfortable in change, right? And recognize that, there's a lot of this. So saying, it sounds like from your raising the question, was there a journey that you went on to when you discovered how your changes impact other people?
Well, I feel like there's not a lot. I think now it's more about business relationships, right? I know more so when I was raising my kids, it was having the conversations with them because ultimately it impacted them, but I was raising them in a way to empower them to also own their own choices. As they've gotten older, I mean, they've come to me and say, well, you never really had these rules but you had boundaries, right? You had these, there's different questions that I love that my kids come and ask now, because to me, I was creating such a safe space for them to be able to come back and ask me those types of questions, which were definitely questions that I wouldn't have asked my own family. And so I think, I kind of treat that the same way in all of my relationships, in terms of just having that openness and um, of if it's going to impact someone. Because sometimes I can make changes that don't necessarily, I don't need to have a conversation with Ray or Jamie to let you guys know that, you know, even when I started showing up for co-working in the online community that I'm in, it's, I did proclaim out loud that I was going to do this, but I could have just did it and not have, not have had the celebration and accountability of me actually showing up. And then there's some more celebrations there, right? Because then there's this, what kind of community am I sharing it in, or who am I sharing it with, to who also is witnessing this one decision that I got to make and I chose to make.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, when you discuss these experiences that you've had with change, and there are so many wonderful little nuggets of wisdom in there, and one of them is the importance of informing people when things are changing.
Yeah.
Well, wait, why was I not told about this? Why, and recognizing that, the very famous thing, when everybody's going through something right now, right? And recognizing that sometimes when you're just stirring things up, right, just by simply being there, things can happen, right? Things can change. Like, wait, what did I say that, triggered this with the other person? And I think it goes back to the idea of having that definition of change. If it's too rigid for you, any interruption is going to upset you, right? Because again, to use Ray's favorite word, control, we're we are so deeply conditioned to control and fix. If we're deeply conditioned to control and fix, all change is a potential problem, because we have to be we have to be problem solvers. But we don't ever stop to think about what the term change solver is, because we talk about change agents, we talk about change, but what we're really inviting people to consider is that it's your definition of change, that if it can change, right, you can recognize that there is that flexibility, that a way to evaluate and adapt based on your own barometer, once again, to change, right? That you're consistent through change is your self-verification process. And you can change that based on new information. But if you're clinging so hard to something that is creating that discomfort and not wanting to change it, do you know what I mean? I hate to keep using these. I feel like you said, saying we're in poetry land, right?
Okay, you gotta keep up, guys. I want to go back to your friend who went to Houlihan's, right, to get the dessert. It cracks me up because I was sitting there thinking, well, why don't you just go find a dupe recipe and find out how to make it yourself, right? Like, and that's part of the adapting to change, instead of pissing people off, right? Every time you go to the restaurant because you didn't like something a big corporation made. And so, and just things like that. But figuring out, how can I make it still work for me?
Right. And I had a huge change happen in my life. Just probably the most foundational change that has happened to me in the last 2 decades. And I wanted to make sure that that self-verification process to go through the change, you can deny that change is happening, right? You can name it, all of the things that you've named it before, but I'll bring you back to this idea of what's alive in the moment. What is this change about? What is, and I'll use, you use the larger example. What's alive in COVID, right? And there were these incredible things that happened. There were some really awful things that happened. There's still some things that we're dealing with because we don't like to deal with change, right? But those things all require a level of learning, adaptation, and evaluation, and a willingness to, have that barometer be here, and give yourself some time to adjust and give others the time to adjust. Ray?
Oh yeah,
Make
totally.
this
Well
make this all
said.
make sense, Ray.
I
Put
thought
this
you
in a
just did. You just did actually.
Together.
It was connecting all the ideas of
right.
how we internalize and how we assess and connecting all these aspects. That's what makes sense to me, is when you take what Sang has said and what you've said and what I'm thinking, and we put it together to say, oh, okay, so I do have choice. I do understand what is going on. I get to evaluate and adjust. And I think that, the freedom to choose, and even though it's not may be a complete decision, but I'm always fascinated the minute someone speaks up,
Mm-hmm.
it ripples through the conversation. It ripples through the situation. And even then, when we think we've lost control, that's the fascinating part, is that I think we've all witnessed where corporations have made a decision and they say, no, we're not backing down, we're backing down. Then all of a sudden there's a media story in Canada here, is all of a sudden there's a reversal because they were testing the waters, which is, I don't like that. But in essence, if that person hadn't spoken up, and it's usually a person of great credibility, a person who, when you listen to, you went, wow, I really like what they said. I feel the same way. So back to that inner sense and felt sense of, I agree with that. That's not fair. That's not right. And it shifted. It
Right.
shifted the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of shifts and change, I'm going to shift us and change us.
Oh.
Oh, he got the button.
Did you?
I got the button in the room here. So
Wow.
I'm making a big change right now. This was unexpected to the two of you, and unexpected certainly to the people who are watching right now. We are going to be changing. That little picture of me over there is not permanently part of this space, but it is our. Go ahead.
I like it. I'm teasing.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
like, hi, Jamie.
Well, this is going to be the sort of new home for Rise and Shine Sundays moving forward. And it had been our intention to move here this Sunday, but that change was not yet sufficient to we could make the change and everybody could get into the room except for me. So we'll be working on making those changes. I just want to give everybody a quick heads up that moving forward, you'll be able to join us in the discussion as a member of our audience by going to the simple URL of rsslive.org. And in the weeks to come, we're going to be involving you in some of the changes in the discussions in a more immediate way than we have. And this will be taking place in this particular space. What do you guys think of the space?
It's so neat. It's so cozy.
It's cozy. It's warm. It's inviting, and it suits the dynamic that you've shared with us, Jamie. That by exchanging ideas and we're having conversations, and we're still part of it. So we're closer together. Love it.
Yeah. And again, what we're hoping is that this change will be something that will be welcomed with those of you who do watch us on Sunday mornings. And we're looking then to sort of grow and change our community. So in the weeks ahead, keep your fingers crossed. That the behind the scenes technology will allow Rise and Shine Sundays to be held in a space where you can not only watch and observe, but participate in the same room where we're at. So thank you for allowing me to change up the dynamic to just kind of give you that. As we kind of draw to the close of this hour, have we changed our definition of change?
Change simply is.
Yes, we all came back to Jessica. Everything goes back to the book of Jessica at this moment.
Back to Jessica. Change simply is. I mean, like we've always said, change is inevitable whether we are the ones, that begin the change, or if it's happening external, because again, we get to decide how we show up with whatever change is happening outside of here. Like, they're coming to pave the parking lot. So now I've got to change where I park, right? Like, and people might gripe about it for like 5 days about, oh my gosh, like this and that. But but it's clearly the adaptation, like what you were talking about, the adaptation, the embracing what change there is. And I think, again, going back to Jessica, and change simply is, and we get to decide.
Ray, any other thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, that's awesome, because I think what I've experienced and is exploring and deepening the understanding of what change is,
Mm-hmm.
and what it means and how we can adapt to it. So in some ways, it's gone beyond definition. It's the understanding, and then we can adapt what we think it is and share it with others. I think that's the key thing, is to, once you have that understanding, you can then say, hey, this is how I see it. And then somebody else says, wow, that's very different from what I was thinking.
Yeah. And you just hit on one wonderful point of what we can do for other people in change. And it is how we handle ourselves in change and how we handle change.
Mm-hmm.
That is a wonderful embodied message to be able to convey to people who are close to you.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of us got messages very early that, again, with the evaluation of change came first, which means I don't like it. You even bring up the idea that it's going to change. I'm going to move evaluation from the choice point all the way to the beginning point, and I'm going to hold to that definition, right? But if we ourselves have learned a different way to sort of handle change, we can embody that with other people. So regardless of, something didn't work this morning. Well, I know your heart was. Another friend of mine used to say, "Hey, did you hear that Jamie Rich robbed a bank?" And all of a sudden you want to change your opinion, and it's just like, well, and my friend would say, well, you know what? I know Jamie Rich, and if he robbed a bank, I'm sure he had a good reason for it, right?
As long as it wasn't my bank.
That's right. Well, and I'm not trying to accuse myself of a crime here, but I'm. Go ahead, saying I didn't mean to.
No, I wasn't going to say anything.
I'm using humor in this moment to illustrate a point, which is, you can, how you handle that information, because, we've got live late breaking news wanting us to change every day. And we have people who are trying to pitch things to us who use terms like hook. And, so there are all of these things that do happen to us to get us to change in some certain direction. So again, how you learn how to somatically handle that. And if you allow your definition of change to be based on your self-verification, that you also allow to evolve in the moment, in the minute, how great is that? I mean, how great is that as things change? So Jessica has suggested that we close the show in a uniquely sort of interesting way, right? So here's this. We can choose to make a fuss about things, or we can show up, throw up our hands and go,
no slime.
Yeah, no slime.
A slime-free zone.
That's right.
No slime.
So we invite you to hold that image in your mind as you move through your week until next time we gather for Rise and Shine Sundays to see what emerges. We appreciate you waking up with us on Sunday mornings to participate in this wonderful conversation of emergence. And we're hoping that you'll be able to share that with us in a room that we'll have ready for you next week. Our thanks, as always, to everyone who is watching, to the assembled guests here, and to you for watching and following along with us. So on behalf of the Breakthrough Show Network, coming up at noon Eastern Time is Spirit Sessions. And from all of us, happy emerging.
Yes.
Until next time.